This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
So what we're going to do, rather than go back to the very beginning again, although we took a break last week and did a class on Purim and the history of Purim, so we're going to keep going in our little Jewish history series. I'm going to do a class today since I see I have enough handouts pre-made. We talked about the purpose of creation's relationship with God. You can keep this as a souvenir. Who says you don't get anything for free in this world? So thought I'd do a class on it. Before we go into Jewish history, talk a little bit about Jews, because Jewish history is a combination of God and the Jewish people, and to understand a little bit about who we are makes a lot of things clear, not about the past, what's going on today. And I have to say this class comes out of my own personal experience, which I don't know, most of you don't know my own personal experience, but I am what's called FFA, from Ish. I'm a product of Aish Torah. I'm not I was raised in a secular, reform, non-observant home, where we used to have ham and cheese on matzah for Passover kind of thing. So, and I went to a public school. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, in a place that was very culturally Jewish, but not religious. My neighborhood, like 14 houses on my street, 12 of them were Jews. My elementary school, 25 kids in my class, and 20 of them are Jewish. Like 3 black kids, 2 Italians, and 20 Jews. My parents were not religious, but very culturally Jewish. Their sense of humor, their taste in food, their friends. As I got older, the demographic widened, and I got to hang out with different people. My best friend in junior high school and high school was a Japanese kid named David Nakagawa. My best friend in college, who's still a very close friend of mine, was a son of a Lutheran minister from upstate New York near Buffalo, who had 3 sisters named Faith, Hope, and Charity. So I kid you not. And I noticed that Jews seem to have like a different sense of humor, a different taste in food. I always noticed, by the way, that Jews and Italians seem to get along really well. Not just an organized crime. Go read about Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky. You'll get there. Anyway, Mediterranean people seem to get along pretty well. But the first question I asked when I came to Israel many, many, many years ago, I asked Rabbi Noach Weinberg, the founder of Aish Torah, blessed memory, I said, Rabbi Weinberg, are Jews different than non-Jews? Interesting question. Are Jews different than non-Jews? And he was a genius at saying very profound things very simply. But before I tell you what he said, let me ask you guys, show of hands, who thinks Jews are different than non-Jews? And I'm not saying better, just like different. Don't be afraid to vote. There's no one's almost. When I ask this question, at least 3/4 of the audience votes yes. But the real interesting question is, assuming Jews are different, what accounts for the difference? You guys know the great debate in psychology. We are who we are because of nature or nurture. Nature is internal stuff, genetics, or nurture is environment. So, by the way, even if we decide it's one or the other, clearly, let's say we say Jews are by nature different than non-Jews, clearly environment plays a role, because if you travel around the world like I do all the time, I just came back from 12 days in South Africa, and then 2 weeks before I was in the States, and then in Mexico. Even Jews around the world, let's say we're internally different. New York Jews are different from California Jews, and Mexican Jews are different than American Jews, and South African Jews are totally different. That kind of thing. So, all cultures impact sort of our personality. I heard a funny joke that illustrates that. It goes like this. In the best of all possible worlds, the cooks are French, the soldiers are British, the lovers are Italians, and the engineers are German. And in the worst of all possible worlds, the cooks are British, the soldiers are French, the lovers are German, and the engineers are Italian. No one ever went to England for the food. Like, they boil pizza there. For about 10 years, if you put in Google, no offense, but if you put in Google French military victories and hit I feel lucky, it would say no such category exists. Did you mean French military defeats? Whatever, I guess someone on Google's not a fan of Francophile. So obviously the nurture plays a role. But let me ask this, before we go further, who thinks the essential difference between Jews and non-Jews is something internal? Like that it's actually nature? Who thinks? One person, that's it. 2 people. Usually the vote drops about 50% because people get nervous about that. Genetics, race, they're thinking of the Nazis, God forbid. So what Rabbi Weinberg, again, gave me a very profound answer in a very simple way, which is the basis of the whole little presentation I want to do now. He said Jews are different. He said every Jew inherits from Grandpa Abraham and Great-Grandma Sarah, a certain drive. He said non-Jews can be driven too, but Jews are disproportionately driven. It's like a spiritual genetic thing. And he said if a Jew, he or she, is connected to the same mission as Great-Grandpa Abraham and Sarah were connected to, they're going to use the drive to do exactly what Abraham and Sarah were trying to do that we talked about previously. Like to bring this idea of God into the world, ultimate meaning, spirituality, light to nations. He said, but if not, the drive is just a raw force pushing Jews to rise to the top, to be the biggest doctors and lawyers and accountants. And then he said something funny. When a Jew stops driving himself, he drives his kids. I would tweak that a little differently and say she drives her kids. No question, in my mind as a historian, that after God, the greatest force in Jewish history is Jewish mothers. Like until I get my PhD, my mother's never going to leave me alone. She's like, I want Rabbi Doctor. I'm leaving money in the will. So what he was pointing out is an idea called spiritual genetics. And by the way, I'm not the only person to notice that Jews seem to be different. A lot of famous people have talked about it. Look at quote number 1. This is Mark Twain, famous American author whose real name is... No one knows Mark Twain's real name? Samuel Clemens. One day it's going to be on a quiz show, and if you get it right because you remember that answer, I want 10%. Not only is he a famous author of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and those books, he has 7 patents for suspenders, which if your English is braces. I know these things. My wife's from London. So what does Mark Twain, American author, say about the Jewish people about 150 years ago? Quote number 1, if statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It constitutes it suggests a nebulous dim puff of smoke lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagant in proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. All things are mortal but the Jew, all their forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Great quote. Now Mark Twain's pointing at 2 things. One is, how come the Jews so small? Like, what a huge impact. And how do we outlast everyone even though everyone seems to hate us? So the idea that Rabbi Weinberg was bringing down is a concept of spiritual genetics, which is a concept that's not scientific, it's spiritual. Let me give you the short version of the class. The idea is, and we see this, by the way, in biology, you get a international sign for women. You get a woman and a man, and they have kids. And we know, fact, science, that you inherit DNA from your parents. You get it from the father, from them. I was looking at kids to see who's the daddy model, who's the mommy model, who's the hybrid model. My wife always says it's not fair. The women do all the work and the kids usually look like the father anyway. So scientifically, no one debates that. So Judaism says that the original nations that inhabited the earth were basically large extended families. A couple had kids, those kids had kids. And today we're all mushmash. We have United Colors of Benetton. The whole world is mushed up and everyone travels and intermarries races, peoples, nations. But back then, a nation was basically the sum total of the original genetic material, which means you could trace their origins back genetically to 2 people. But Judaism says there's an idea of spiritual genetics, that you pass on traits to your children, that they inherit, nothing to do with their environment. If you're a parent, you see this, by the way. Your kids come out basically the way they are. That's who they are the rest of their lives. You can tweak it a little bit, but that's who they are. So these original nations had not only genetic connections, but they had certain collective personality traits and behaviors that were built into who they were. Now, these nations don't exist anymore. Like most ancient nations, they disappeared. But if you could beam yourself back in time thousands of years, you'd bump into a guy on the street and you'd go like that's such a Canaanite thing to do. Or like, what a Moabite. I think it's getting really hot in here. You don't want to get it too hot. We're going to melt. So those nations are pretty much all gone. We are one of the oldest nations on the planet Earth. And while a lot of people have joined the Jewish people and many, many, many have left, I hold for everyone who's Jewish today, there's like 50 or so non-Jews who should be Jewish. Only a fraction of the Jews are in the world that should be in the world. But we have certain personality traits which go all the way back to Abraham and Sarah. Look at quote number 3. This is to explain this a little more technically. This is the great 18th century Jewish scholar, rabbi, author, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. We know him as the Ramchal, author of several famous works in Judaism. One is called Derech Hashem, which is the way of God, and one is called Mesilat Yesharim, the path of the just. What does the Ramchal say in quote number 3? He says the descendants of each of these individuals, the 70 original nations he's talking about that supposedly inhabited the world after the flood, were thus divided into permanent groupings, each with their own characteristics and limitations. They were destined to father future generations who would inherit these characteristics, just as members of any particular species inherit the characteristics of their forebears. So, you got the point? That's a scientific way of saying what I just said simply. So, like I said, we Jews, therefore, have certain personality traits which are the collective manifestation of the essence of who Abraham and Sarah were. Non-Jews can have some of these traits also, but Jews have it in disproportionate amount. So what are those traits? What sets Abraham apart? Now it's interesting. Look at quote number 2. This is a great book that came out in like 1969, 1970 by a Dutch-American writer named Ernst Vandenhag. I think he was a sociologist. Maybe he was Jewish. His name was Bernie Schwartz, and he figured he'd sell more books sounding like some exotic European ice cream. Vandenhag. Anyway, it's actually a very interesting book. I have 2 copies of it in my house. What does Vandenhag write in quote number 2 in his Jewish Mystique book? Asked to make a list of the men who have most dominated the thinking of the modern world, many educated people would name Freud, Einstein, Marx, and Darwin. Of these 4, only Darwin was not Jewish. In a world where Jews are only a tiny percentage of the population, what is the secret of the disproportionate importance that Jews have had in the history of Western culture? Now, it's interesting. What he's pointing out is, of the 4 people whose ideas arguably have impacted the world more than anyone else's in the last 100-plus years, 3 of them are Jewish. I think Matthew Berger once said 3 were Jewish and 1 was wrong. Okay, so I don't agree with that. I'm not a Marxist. He's totally wrong. I'm not a Freudian. Einstein's held up well. Darwin, the one non-Jew, was the most religious of all 4 of those, by the way. It's not a question of right or wrong, but whose most transformative ideas? The 3 are Jewish? That's crazy. Wild stuff. That's the essence of what Abraham is about. When you look at the Jewish people, you get like 3 traits, and I mention this all the time. Number 1 is that we are basically free thinkers. We are radical. Jews are radical thinkers. Abraham, to come up with the most radically transformative idea in all of human history is one God. The impact of one God on morality and values and determinism, it's transformative beyond imagination. It's the first book I wrote, World Perfect. It's just dealing with the impact of one God on monotheism. Radical, like Jonathan Sacks. You guys know Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of the UK. Definitely one of the smartest Jews around. And he has such a beautiful London accent. Everything he says sounds smart, even when he has to go to the bathroom. I want to make him the official spokesperson for the Jewish people. Jonathan Sacks wrote a great book called Radical Then, Radical Now. About the Jewish people. Number 2, to take a radically transformative idea that no one wants to hear and most people will kill you for saying, and push that idea on the world. What trait does it take? The title of the class. Here you can share one. Which is driven. We are driven people. We have drive. Jews are disproportionately driven people. And the third trait I would say, there's a lot of little ones, but the third one is, if you guys remember the early stories about Abraham, before he decided to biologically create an outreach team by having his own offspring and making a family that made a nation to change the world, what was his original outreach strategy that's brought down in Jewish sources? He had a tent with flat screen TV, plasma, and Wi-Fi. No. He had a tent with 4 doors. Why? Good ventilation, cross breeze, light from all angles. No. 2? Welcome guests. Chesed. Chesed. Jews care. These are like the traits. By the way, Vandenhagen's quote was totally pointing to that one. That Jews have always been radically transformative thinkers. The problem with spiritual genetics, guys, is unlike biology and DNA, you can't measure in a microscope. Like you look at it and see there. But clearly, statistically, it sticks out like a flashing red light. There's so many examples. Here we go. Lastly, lucky you get the last copy. Then I run out. There are so many examples statistically. Let me just run through a few of them. And the point of this is not to brag about Jewish accomplishment, but rather to clearly demonstrate the disproportionate impact we have given our teeny tiny size. What percentage of America is Jewish? I know in Brooklyn it seems like everyone is. What percentage of the United States is Jewish? 1.7% of America is Jewish. Yet Jews make up on average 10% of the professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants. 10% of the student body and faculty of most colleges and universities. The better the schools, the more the Jews. Like the Ivy Leagues, Harvard, law school, tenured professors is 40% Jewish. Crazy stuff. So, by the way, if this is something that's truly a aspect of the Jewish personality, it should appear at all periods of time in history. Like a scientific experiment, gravity should work the same if I'm in Australia and America and Canada, if it's truly, that kind of thing. So if we take Jews and put them in Germany pre-1933, pre-Hitler's coming to power, 1935 Nuremberg laws, when Jews were thrown out of universities and locked out of professions and lost their citizenship and their rights, what percentage of Germany was Jewish pre-Holocaust? 0.6%. Yet Jews were the same 10% of doctors, lawyers, accountants, and owned 70% of the department stores in Germany. You know that joke, why did God create Gentiles? Someone had to buy retail. Okay. Go back 1,000 years ago to Speyer, my family's from, Spiro. And then Bishop Lustiger of Speyer writes, this is when there was only the Jews you can number in the thousands in all of Europe, outside of Spain, of course. He said, wishing to make Speyer into a city, and believe me, no bishop in Europe liked Jews. He said, wishing to make Speyer into a city, I invited in Jews. Because the bishop of Speyer 1,000 years ago knew that Jews were such a dynamic force for change that having a couple hundred Jews in his town would change the economy of the town, it would grow it into a city, and he could build a cathedral. So you see that no matter where we are, we're always disproportionately impactful, thus indicating it has nothing to do with our environment, but something internal in who we are wherever you put us, even in difficult situations. What's the benchmark award for excellence in this world given by the guy who invented TNT that didn't want to be known for explosives from Sweden? Alfred Nobel, the Nobel Prize. What percentage of the world is Jewish? These are big numbers. 0.2% of the world's population is Jewish, yet look at quote number 4. I think this is actually, this is an old version of the quote. You're going to have to share, I'm sorry, because I have an old, I'm going to read the new quote. I'll give this back to you after. I just have an old hand. Here it is, quote number 4. At least 194 Jews in persons of half. This is old, this is a couple of years old, it's gone up. At least 194 Jews in persons of half or 3/4 Jewish ancestry have been awarded the Nobel Prize, accounting for 23% of all individual recipients worldwide between 1901 and 2014. You guys get how insane that is? Jews have almost 1/4 of the Nobel Prizes in the world. If all the Jews in the world lived in Israel, teeny Israel the size of New Jersey, would have more Nobel Prizes than any country on the planet Earth. We got 24% of the Fields Medals in mathematics. 25% of the Forbes list of the wealthiest people on the planet Earth are Jewish. Of the top 100, 50% of the top 100 are Jewish. I'm not saying this to brag, just to clearly illustrate there's something crazy about Jewish impact. It's so disproportionate, like a flashing light, showing there's something about the Jews. Okay? So that's number one thing. Now I have a book, by the way, called What Do They Think of the Jews? It's actually a book. Anyone famous or semi-famous who said anything about us is in this book. And some of them like us, some of them hate us, some of them are neutral on us, but they all see more or less the same traits in the Jewish people. Drive always comes out. Sometimes viewed negatively, sometimes viewed positively. One of my favorite quotes is quote number 5. This is the famous 19th century German author, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Don't pronounce his name Goethe. People will think you're not well educated. What does Goethe write about the Jews? He says, energy is the basis of everything. Every Jew, no matter how insignificant, is engaged in some decisive and immediate pursuit of a goal. It is the most perpetual people of the earth. We should have like a t-shirt that has that on it. Jewish people, most perpetual people of the earth. My favorite quote is quote number 6. This is from a famous British psychoanalyst from the middle of the 20th century. His name is Ernst Jones. What does Ernst Jones write? Quote number 6. Whatever other qualities Jews may possess, likable or the reverse, no one who knows them well can deny that they are personally interesting. By that I mean especially alive, alert, quick at comprehending people and events, and making pungent and witty comments on them. One might at times find their rather hothouse family atmosphere with its intensities and frictions somewhat trying, but one could be sure of never being bored. That is the single best one-sentence description of Israel I've ever read. And if you live here, you get it. By the way, if you're here for a while, you get desensitized to it. Let me give you, since Shabbat is coming up, I'm going to give you an empirical homework assignment. You don't have to research anything. Just try and look around Israel with fresh eyes. Because when you're here a while, you get desensitized. Like my grandmother, a blessed memory, used to live in Queens next to the elevated subway train. And I remember going to her house visiting. When the train would go by, I would hide because I thought a jet plane was landing in the living room, and she wouldn't even notice it. Like the Muslims screaming in the middle of the night, after a while you barely notice it anymore. So you get desensitized to it. But notice the following things about Israel, which is a teeny tiny country the size of New Jersey that contains almost half the Jews in the world stuffed into a little place. So you want to see the Jewish personality, completely rarefied and diluted by outside influence of other cultures. Notice Israel. Notice that the horn and the gas pedal seem to be connected. Notice that the colors on a traffic light are red, honk, green. Notice that all regulations in Israel, especially related to driving, seem to be merely suggestions. Notice that please, excuse me, and thank you are only appearing in Hebrew dictionaries and in Ulpan, but rarely actually used in conversational Hebrew. It's a joke. When we married my middle daughter off, she got married at 19. She married a Yemenite guy. 2 of my kids married Yemenites. It's great. He had 350 cousins who all came to the wedding. We had 720 people at the wedding. We insisted, my British wife and I, that they write thank you notes. We could not find a package of thank you notes in Israel. They don't exist. The guy in Kravitz, the big stationery store, said, Yisraelim no omim todah. Israelis don't say thank you. We had to make our own. The energy here is crazy. Like a taxi driver picks you up, and if you speak English, or you speak Hebrew, he speaks English, the whole way you're driving, he's telling you all the answers to the world's problems. And then he stops in the middle and picks someone else up without asking you. I love that one. And then he drops you off at your house and asks you what you paid for it. Like my British wife thinks, what time is it, is a personal question. The energy here is crazy. They're pushing the shoving. Spend a week here, a month here. And then leave. Go I flew back last time. El Al flight was canceled. I flew on Swiss Air. Oh my God. El Al, forget it. El Al is like mini Israel. It's like 400 Jews stuffed into a little space with a flight attendant giving you advice. You want to see obsequious flight attendants travel on Cathay Pacific with little Asian women running around. But spend a week here and then go. Doesn't work if you go to New York because there's too many Jews. But I once flew from Israel to Indianapolis, Indiana. Stand in downtown Indianapolis after being in Israel for a month. You know what you're going to feel? Gentiles. My blood pressure goes down 30 points when I leave this country. Hey, maybe sit next to, because you have to share the quotes here. I ran out of sheets. Sit next to this young lady over here. You guys get the point? Think about it. This is that Jewish energy. It's part of that personality that you see unadulterated when you hang out in the land of Israel. But this drive has a negative side. We're all different like snowflakes, but we all have a negative side to our personality. All of us are different. You're never supposed to compare yourself to anyone else. Some of you only know me for half hour, not even. Who thinks I'm patient? No one's ever raised their hand for that. Certainly not my mother. I have a huge amount of energy, which has a good side to it. It means I can teach and go for hours, and I project. And my negative side is to have a lot of impatience. My job is to control my impatience and use the energy in a positive way. We Jews have one giant collective thing, this drive thing. We have these traits to us. But we have one giant collective sort of negative trait associated with us, which is brought down in the book of Exodus. What's the most oft-repeated criticism of the Jewish people in the Bible? We are a... What's the word used?
Stubborn.
What's the actual expression used in Hebrew? Am kashi oref. We're a stiff-necked people. What does stiff-necked mean? I hurt my neck playing football? No, it means we're stubborn. Now, by the way, it makes total sense to have this trait, like I said before. To come up with a radically transformative idea and not care what anyone thinks about it, to be willing to die for your beliefs, to change the world in ways that are so profound that very few people, including most Jews, don't even appreciate it, boy, does that require stubbornness and stiff-necked. But what's the negative side of being so stubborn and stiff-necked? It makes us a very argumentative, fractious, disunified people. Look at the Midrash. Midrash is literature brought down by rabbis going back 1,800, 2,000 years ago, based on traditions, some of which are literal, some of which are allegorical, but they fill in a lot of the details in the stories in the Bible. Look at quote number 7. Midrash Shmot Rabbah, Shmot is the book of Exodus. What is meant by saying the Jews are stiff-necked, which is Exodus 32, verse 9? Rav Yakim said, there are 3 who are inherently chutzpahdik. Guys, that is the word that describes Jews. Most non-Jews can't even say that word. Unless you're Swiss, Dutch, or South African, or something like that, or Scottish. Where you have to have a loch, or something like that. You have to have a chus sound in your language. What does chutzpah mean? By the way, most non-Jews can't say tuchas either. Audacity, nerve, spunk, gumption. That is the word that describes Jews. There are 3 who are inherently chutzpahdik, the Midrash says. The dog amongst the animals, the rooster amongst the birds, and the Jews amongst the nations. You might think this is something negative, but it's really praise. It means that a Jew would rather be hanged than give up his Judaism. Rav Abin said to this very day, the Jews in diaspora, he's saying this 1,800 years ago, the Jews in diaspora are called stiff-necked. It is an eternal trait of the Jewish people to be this way. We see it has very positive utilitarian function to enable us to impact the world. But the negative side is it makes us really fractious. Again, this is a trait you see throughout the world, throughout Jewish history, and it explains so much of what happened and went wrong in the past and what's going on crazy in the Jewish world today. And Jewish humor, by the way, reflects this a lot. Like, you ever heard that the joke about a Jew gets stranded on a desert island, he builds 2 synagogues, one that he prays in and one that he doesn't pray in? Because every Jew has to have a synagogue he doesn't pray in. You know, they make a joke about it, but real life is stranger than fiction. I remember after the U.S. Army went, after 9/11, the U.S. Army went into Kabul, Afghanistan. The first Hanukkah after the U.S. Army went in, the CNN reporter was looking for an Afghanistani Hanukkah story, which 1,000 years ago would have been easy because it was a huge community. Now, by the time he got there were 2 Jews left in the whole country. First night of Hanukkah. One was named Levin, one was named Simchov. Levin has already died a few years ago. And the first night of Hanukkah, they're lighting menorahs on either side of this abandoned synagogue and not speaking to each other. So even the non-Jewish CNN reporter realizes how crazy it is. He walks over to the older one, Levin, and says, "Can't you guys light a menorah together?" And Levin says, "I'm 70 years old. I've lived through everything. I've lived through, the Muslims and the Soviet invasion, the Taliban, the U.S. invasion, but that guy Simintov, he's evil." And I fell out of my chair. I was laughing so hard. That's the Jewish people. Remember that great, maybe apocryphal, I've never been able to verify it really happened, but story between David Ben-Gurion and the first prime minister of Israel, and Harry Truman, the president who was president during when Israel became a state in 1948. You want to just sit next to someone who is, you can look on and share a seat with them. Sit next, you can read the quotes along. So Harry Truman says to Ben-Gurion, "You have no idea what it's like to be the president of a country of 180 million people." That's what America was back then. And Ben-Gurion says, "You're right, but you have no idea what it's like to be the prime minister of a country of 1.8 million prime ministers." Because it's easier to be the emperor of 1 billion Chinese than the mayor of a town of 100 Jews. I'm not saying anything negative about Chinese. We are crazy, stiff-necked, fractious people. One more anecdote. When I was doing my tour guides course, I'm also a tour guide, we studied Israel's military history from a guy by the name of Meir Pa'il, who, if he's alive today, must be well into his 90s, and he was around the founding of the state. And he said, "I've seen every army in the world on maneuvers." He said, "In every army, it's the exact same thing. The officers give orders, the soldiers salute, and they carry out the orders." He said, "But in the Jewish army, in the Israeli army, you have to explain things." Jews don't take orders. I was a Boy Scout. I was an Eagle Scout. I was an assistant scoutmaster. A scout, by the way, I have to say I learned more in Boy Scouts that is practical than like 18 years in school. Knots, first aid, great stuff. But Boy Scouts is a paramilitary organization. You have dress inspection, marching competition. I can say 100% that my 14-year-old Boy Scouts, and I did the Army, and all of my kids have been in the Army except for one, and all these different units, and how many ceremonies I've been through, crazy. No question my 14-year-old Boy Scouts could march far better than any of the most elite units of the IDF, who are horrible at it. Why? Jews don't know left and right? No, you're doing left, I'm going to do right, I'm going to do doing it. It's like not a Jewish thing. Makes great soldiers, by the way, because every Jewish corporal is really a general. If I had like an hour, I could just tell you stories about amazing stories, especially in the Golan Heights in 73 with Victor Kahlani, or Svika Greengold with one tank, holding off the entire Syrian armor corps with one tank kind of thing, just being really smart and like outsmarting them. So this is that Jewish personality thing. By the way, if there's anything that gets a Jew excited, first of all, what's the closest thing that a Jew can get involved in today that's almost like what Abraham was trying to do? What's Abraham's thing? Tikkun olam, fix the world. What's the next best thing a Jew can get involved in that always gets Jews excited?
Money.
No, that's a stereotype. It's a stereotype. Like the stereotype that Jews are cheap. Jews are the most generous people in the world, by the way. We're just not stupid with our money. I saw a great statistic. It's from 1995 to 2000. I got to update this, but this is what I remember. Jews in America gave 25% of the mega gifts. That's being 1.7% of the population. Gave 25% of the mega gifts of $10 million and above, totaling, I think it was $3.4 billion of charity, of which 96% went to non-Jewish causes. Isn't that amazing? We're the most generous people in the world, which goes back to the point I really want to make. What's the thing that gets a Jew most excited in this world today is getting involved in a cause. God, this is even better than Nobel Prizes, where we got almost 25%. Take any cause to make the world a better place you could think of in the last 100 years plus. Any political movement to fix things, communism, socialism, feminism, black civil rights, anti-apartheid, child labor laws, labor unions, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, you name it. I will show you if it isn't founded by a Jew, who's 0.2% of the world's population, it's overwhelmingly, disproportionately run by Jews. Like the co-founder of the American Red Cross with Clara Barton was Jewish. The founder of the second largest Christian charity in the world, which is the Salvation Army. It's a guy named William Booth. I looked at William Booth's lineage. His mother is a Jew from Nottingham, England, even though he was raised as a Christian. Nothing gets a Jew more excited than trying to fix the world. They say Jews for every ism but Judaism. We are these crazy, radically transformative people. Look at quote number 8, Vandenhag again, our Dutch-American sociologist. I love this quote. He says, of all groups, Jews are most prone to expectation of radical change. Although very few Jews are radicals, very many radicals are Jews. Out of 100 Jews, 5 may be radicals, but out of 10 radicals, 5 are likely to be Jewish. What attracts them so disproportionately to radical causes? And again, it's a combination of all of this stuff. It's that we care about the world, and we think outside the box, and we want to make a difference. So trust me, make a cause. The only thing that gets Jews probably a little less excited than free all-you-can-eat sushi is any idea that's going to fix the world. Jews for every ism but Judaism. It is one of the clearest examples of that Jewish personality. By the way, even things that are anti-Jewish, like I think a third of them students who are in solidarity for Palestine are Jews. All the academic boycotts being organized against Israeli institutions of higher learning in America, England, South Africa, Australia, they're all organized by left-wing Jewish university professors who don't have really Torah software but really care about the outrageous mistreatment of Palestinians. We're not going to go there, but it's pretty wild stuff. What's interesting also, besides all of this stuff, is what we do, we're going to do big, even if it's bad. Before I even get to that, by the way, one more thing to focus on. It really is a Jewish trait, which if you stick around, I'll do a whole class on it. Which political ideologies have gotten Jews most excited in history? They even founded them, as a matter of fact. Which modern modern political movements have been created by Jews in human history? Number one is communism. Who first thought of communism? Actually, Moses Hess, who taught it to Karl Marx, Hess was Jewish, Marx was Jewish, Engels, the other great, was not. But if you study the history of communism and socialism and progressive politics in Europe, which is what it all is, it is overwhelmingly a who's who of Jews. Why are Jews so obsessed? Which is, by the way, why how many Americans consider themselves liberals in America, on average? The average American, what percentage of America?
60.
28%. What percentage of Jews consider themselves liberal? About 72%. Jews are 2.5 times more likely to consider themselves liberal into progressive politics than non-Jews. Why are they so obsessed with this? It's interesting. Not do a class on this, and I'll do a class on it later. What's the real difference? Just to focus on it. It really goes to the Jewish personality. What is the real difference between a Tea Party conservative in America and an Obama progressive? And Obama's a huge progressive. What's the difference between the two of them? There's issues like abortion on demand and death penalty and gay rights and things like that. That's not the real issue. What's the real issue? What does a progressive want? Does he want big or little government?
Little.
A progressive?
Big.
Biggest government possible. A little or a lot of taxes? As much taxes. A little or a lot of government interference in your life? As much as possible. What does a Tea Party conservative want?
Opposite.
Small government, no taxes, and his gun. And as much autonomy as possible. Which one is top down? Progressives progressive is totally top down. Government. Guys, when Jews replace God with government, they will naturally always gravitate, because we care. If God's not going to fix the world, who's going to do it? Government. This is one of the sort of rules of being a secular liberal Jew. It's unbelievable. And by the way, that you can literally divide the voting patterns of American Jews between Orthodox who vote more towards who's going to vote Republican in America, most likely? Orthodox Jews. I'm not going to the topic of why. But certainly, when Jews replace God with government, they will always gravitate towards the form of government that they believe will make progress in the world in solving all the world's problems, which involves big government, a lot of taxes, a lot of intervention. Look at Edmund Wilson. I love this quote, famous American literary critic from the mid 20th century. He so nails the Jewish personality. Quote number 9. The Jew lends himself easily to communism because it enables him to devote himself to a high cause. involving all of humanity, characteristics which are natural to him as a Jew. Guys, take any cause, any top-down, holistic, fix-the-world thing, whether it's a political movement or a cause, Jews will gravitate to it like bees to honey. I'm telling you, think about it, it explains so much about Jews and how they look at government. And by the way, whatever we do, even if it's bad, it's going to be big. Doesn't have to always be good. Nobel Prizes, not always. Like, take the biggest stock market scandals you could think of on Wall Street. Ivan Boesky, Michael Milken, Bernie Madoff, $65 billion Ponzi scam, all Jews. Organized crime, one of my favorite topics. I love reading an organized crime. I just finished reading a book called Tough Jews by Richie Cohen. Because his father used to hang out in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn with all these mafia guys. And it was unbelievable. Like, you think organized crime got organized by the Italians? Only when Charlie Lucky Luciano meets up with Meyer Lansky in the late 20s and early 30s does crime get organized. By the way, the difference is, I'm not being racist, that Jews got out of it immediately within one generation. Italians still stayed in it. His whole crime families that have been going on, Gotti and all these guys, and for generations later. But whatever we do, it's gonna be big, even if it's the baddest stuff. So guys, you see, no matter how you slice it, think about what I said, it makes sense. And everyone who knows us well, whether they like us or not, or don't like us, they see it. Look at Winston Churchill, quote number 10. Now, Churchill happens to be a guy who was a big supporter of Zionism, and he liked the Jewish people very much. He's also one of my favorite political personalities of modern history. Great speaker. What does Churchill write in quote number 10? Some people like Jews, and some do not, but no thoughtful man can deny the fact that they are beyond any question the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has appeared in this world. And sometimes, by the way, the people who hate us the most get us the best. And who's the person arguably hated Jews more than anyone else in the last, 150 years? Hands down, it's got to be Adolf Hitler. Who we call him crazy, and trust me, he may have been more neurotic than most of us, but he was not a crazy guy. It takes greatness to do great good or great evil in this world. Hitler's a very ideologically motivated person with tremendous potential. But look what he says about the Jews in quote 11. It's amazing how clearly he nails us. If only one country, for whatever reason, tolerates a Jewish family in it, that family will become the germ center. And the term he uses is der Belsenherd, which is basilicus, bacteria. He gets it. Like bacteria spreads, it multiplies and replicates itself. That family become the germ center for fresh sedition. If one little Jewish boy survives, without any Jewish education, with no synagogue and no Hebrew school, look what he says now. It's in his soul. Even if there had never been a synagogue or a Jewish school in the Old Testament, the Jewish spirit would still exist and exert its influence. It has been there from the very beginning, and there is no Jew, not a single one, who does not personify it. Bingo! Guys, Adolf Hitler is not evil because of his understanding of us. I would say Hitler understands who Jews are better than most Jews understand who Jews are. He sees exactly the point I'm saying. He said the power that the Jewish people has nothing to do with environment and Hebrew school and rabbis, and it's in his soul. He understands us better than most of us understand us. He's evil because of his reaction to us, because he sees that the Jews are an unstoppable force, and it's not enough to just let them assimilate. And he let any Jew loose, even with no Hebrew school. He's going to introduce some form, derivative of his Jewish worldview into the world, which Hitler was antithetical to. Pretty unbelievable stuff. So guys, we see this is the essence of who we are. When you start thinking about this and putting it into the formula of Jewish history, it will explain so many things that are going on throughout our history. That how could there be a civil war going on in the city of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago when the Romans are surrounding the city trying to get in and kill us, and we're killing each other for them? If you understand how passionate and driven Jews are, it makes sense. Destructive often, incredibly self-destructive, but that's who we are. So now that we went through the information, I want to go back to where I started. Because I started this whole class explaining how this came out of my personal experience of being raised culturally Jewish, but with no real Jewish software, and interacting with non-Jews later and seeing the differences. So let me fast forward to when I came to Israel, and I spent like 6 months in Aish Torah. And this was a very dangerous phase. 23 years old, FBT, flaming Baal Tshuva, as I call it. The Shiite phase of doing Tshuva. This is when everything is always shaking. Every other word is either mamish or dafka. And of course, when you're 23 years old, you know better than everyone else about everything. You're idealistic, and having gone through the Aish Torah and the old Aish, unfortunately it's not the Aish of today, but the old Aish with Rabbi Weinberg there was all about taking responsibility for the world and change. For Jews who want to change the world, you can come into a place where the guy's talking about changing the world, it just like clicks. So I was like on fire, gone through a very dramatic change in my life, from being secular to religious, from wanting to go to business school to now wanting to be a God Squad guy and changing the world through Jewish values. The most dangerous time to let anyone like that loose on their friends and family back in America. So I went back for my first visit. Thank God I wasn't too crazy religious about it. I was pretty normal, but I was still definitely on fire, and I'm also like super hyper social. I was doing Facebook before Facebook was doing Facebook. I'm going to start a 50-plus social networking site called Facelift. That has an Adobe Photoshop app that makes you look the way you did 30 years ago, and the people who friend you now last saw you and will recognize you. That kind of thing. So I'm going to have Instagram also. I've always kept in touch with my friends. Like 2 years ago, I did a reunion of my 4th grade class. That was so long ago, like Moses was in the class. No, I tell my friends in America where they are. They live down the street from each other. They don't talk to each other. I get them together. So I organized a reunion in America when I came back after being in Israel for 6 months. And it was about 12 people, half Jews, half non-Jews. And everyone was basically talking about the same stuff. Everyone's 22, 23 years old, talking about what? Their grad school, their job, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their stuff. And I'm talking about God, Torah, Jewish destiny, fixing the world, good and evil, end of days. You could cut the room like a knife, the Jews and the non-Jews. What do you think my non-Jewish friends' reaction to all this ranting and raving was? What do you think? They thought it was awesome. My German Lutheran friend, John Frenzel, I'm not exaggerating, I had to talk him out of getting on an airplane and coming back to Israel and converting. My Jewish friend's reaction, and I'm not to make you nervous when I'm speaking, I'm looking at everyone in the room. I see who's paying attention, who's not, who's getting antsy, who wants to leave. I can always tell people getting ready to leave. And I'm saying my Jewish friends are all like arms crossed, defensive position. Leaning forward, getting ready to, I said, if I talk about Judaism for 2 more minutes, I'm only going to have Gentiles as friends. But it's reverse. It should have been the other way. My non-Jewish friends should have been like, what's this Jewish crap? Like, who cares about this? I don't want to hear that. And my Jewish friends should have been, this is my culture, my heritage, I never knew. What was going on there? It's a great lesson for us. The point is exactly that. For my non-Jewish friends, there's a great quote of the rabbis, Godel HaMetzuva. Greater is the one who's commanded to do something. Because what's the inclination when you're commanded to do something, especially if you're Jewish? You do the opposite. When you have teenage kids, you'll see this. You will ask them to take the garbage out 100 times. Every time they will act like you were sending them to the Spanish Inquisition. The world is ending. Then once, it'll happen. You'll make a blessing and a special meal. Once they will volunteer to do it. And you won't even know how to react because it's never happened before or after. But the difference is when you're told you have to do something, it's human nature, especially Jewish human nature, to not want to do it. I'm sitting there preaching to my friends about all this stuff, and my Jewish friends are pushing back on it. The point is, guys, like this. We all have a Jewish soul. Some of our souls are really out there and shining. Some of them are really smothered in a little teeny spark. But it's barely flickering anymore. We all want this stuff, but when you want to sell something to a Jew, you can't push on them because they're just going to push back at you. If the best way to get like 6 million Jews in America to come back to Judaism, what would be the best thing to do?
They can't do it.
Get Congress to outlaw study of Torah. I spent 6 months as a graduate student in Russia, cutting classes and hanging out with hundreds of young Russian Jews who were risking their lives to learn Hebrew. I went to after-school Hebrew school. I did anything I could to get thrown out of it. I'm telling you, that is, so when we're dealing with our fellow Jews, first when we're dealing with ourselves, we have to recognize, we got this Jewish soul. We got to feed it. Like Torah, spirituality is what Jews need. All Jews need it. If we don't get it through Judaism because we had a bad after-school Hebrew school experience, we'll go off and become Boo Jews. Or Jews for Jesus. Well, that's why 60% of all non-Asian Buddhist leaders in the world are Jewish. Because we want spirituality. If we had a bad experience in after-school Hebrew, we'll get it somewhere else. We need that stuff. If you don't feed your soul and give it some spiritual nourishment, it's going to be empty. You'll try and be distracted by looking at your screen all the time and having a bigger house and a bigger flat screen TV and a Tesla and all this nice stuff. There's nothing wrong with having nice stuff, but if you don't feed your soul, you're going to feel empty. When we're dealing with our friends and our family, we got to recognize that they want it too, but I can't push it out. Do it in a non-judgmental way. And we have to recognize, by the way, that we have friends and we have family in this world. And who can you be more casual with, your friends or your family? Family, for sure, because they're blood, like they always forgive you. If you treated your friends like they were family, you wouldn't have any friends. We often forget that we're family. Okay, no, we don't. No, we often forget that we come at each other. We often forget, we look at each other as friends and not family. We have to recognize we're brothers and sisters. And we have to remember that, we may have differences and we're not all ever going to agree. I love when people say Orthodox Jews. The most fractious bunch of Jews in the world are Orthodox Jews. How many different shades of secular Jew are there? Not so many, but trust me, Orthodox, there's like 30 of them. We have to recognize when we're dealing with our fellow Jews that this is my brother and my sister. They may not be holding in the same place I am, and I may not even agree with them, but I got to love them and respect them. And if I can love them and respect them and not lecture them and push them, there's a chance that I can actually have an impact on them. They'll come to me eventually. But that's the real issue, guys. When I compare Jews, I always like to use the analogy of a rocket ship. Think about it, a rocket ship can do great good or great evil. It can launch a communication satellite or it could launch an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile. Rocket ships need fuel and a guidance system, right? If it doesn't have fuel, it's not going to fly very far. If it doesn't have a guidance system, it's not going to hit the target or get to where it has to go. It happens to be for us, guys, the fuel and the guidance system of the Jewish people collectively is one thing, which is what? The Torah. I'm not saying it as a rabbi, I'm saying it as a historian fact. We've survived as Jews without everything that's normative in Judaism, without a state of Israel for 2,000 years, without a temple, without a king, without prophecy, without a Sanhedrin, without a temple, without animals. The only thing we can't live without is what, guys? The Torah. When Jews leave Torah behind, I don't mean the book, like living a Jewish lifestyle based on the Torah, fact, 3 generations usually, 5 max, they're gone. Which is why for everyone Jewish in this world, there are like 50 non-Jews who should be Jewish. But Torah is exactly that commodity that perpetuates the Jewish people more than the Jews kept the Torah kept the Jews. And Torah is the guidance system that directs us in the right way and enables us to use this drive, which we all have, in a way that is positive. Otherwise, you get Jews for every ism but Judaism, and some of the most destructive ideas in the world will come from us. And a misguided Jew is a very dangerous thing. It's like a nuclear weapon in the hands of some rogue terrorist state. We got to be really careful, but the potential is really there. So bottom line is, guys, we got to remember, we all have this in us. We have it in our fellow Jews. The number one challenge facing the Jewish people today, guys, is not Iran going nuclear. It's what? It's us fighting amongst each other. It's crazy. There's millions of people who want us dead, and what are we doing? Arguing. And when we argue too much, what happens, by the way? I can demonstrate this in history. Just to give you one more anecdote. I read a great book, also by Richie Cohen, who wrote Tough Jews. It's called The Avengers. It's about Ava Kovner. Ava Kovner was a young man in charge of the defense of the Vilna Ghetto, which never rose in revolt, by the way. You guys heard the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in April 1943? Against the Germans, the first uprising against... Do you know that during that revolt, the mainstream Zionists refused to fight with the revisionist Beitar Zionists? Because their animosity towards each other was so great, especially the mainstream Zionists towards Beitar, the Irgun guys. Can you imagine? I'm not fighting with you against the Germans. You go fight your own war with the Germans. So crazy stuff. That's the Jewish people. That's that stiff-necked stuff. So Ava Kovner describes how in the Vilna Ghetto they had a meeting one night where he was the head of the mainstream Zionist organization. The Beitar leader came, and the communists. That's like the ghetto. You have to have every Jew has to have his own party, even in the ghetto. And they decided that unlike in Warsaw, they're going to put their differences aside and fight against an obviously much greater enemy. Who's whom? The Germans. Ava Kovner stands up, and it was such a great line, the best line of the book. He goes, Adolf Hitler has finally made us one people. Guys, that's the great external message. If we're going to sit here and fight amongst each other and not focus on what we have in common and recognize that we all have a Jewish soul, we all want the same thing, we may not agree, we got to love and respect each other and use that incredible energy in the right direction, we're going to have people come and remind us. Because in Auschwitz, remember, there weren't different lines for different kinds of Jews, Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, Republicans, Democrats. In the eyes of our enemies, we are all Jews. We have to look at ourselves that way. I'm telling you guys, but the real proactive positive lesson is, guys, all the information I gave, look at the potential and power of the Jewish people. 23% of the Nobel Prizes, 24% of the Fields Medals in mathematics. Look at Israel. No country for its size has contributed more. Look at the buyout they just had for. It's unbelievable. In Mobileye, $16 billion high-tech buyout. Unbelievable. Look at the Jewish people, whether individually, collectively, throughout history in the Jewish state. Look at the potential we have. Imagine if we could just get 10% of the Jewish people focusing on what we have in common and focusing the incredible energy and drive and caring we have on what is our national historic mission. Is there anything in this world we could not accomplish? No question, hands down, we could do it. And all it takes is 10%, by the way. Go read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. One of the most important books ever written, in my opinion, about how change takes place in the world. That's all it takes. And if we don't do it willingly, the non-Jews will remind us, unfortunately. But the best way to end, let me end on a positive note. And the Torah, the Talmud in Tractate Beitza says, I'm paraphrasing, he says that if Jews didn't have Torah, they destroy the world. Because we are so driven and so idealistic. And we have so much energy. And then what does Rashi, the great medieval commentator from outside Paris, from Twain, 1,000 years ago, what does Rashi write? Quote number 12. He said, the Torah was given to the Jews because they are overly aggressive, and the Torah serves to moderate their energy and to subdue their heart. The best combination is that hardware of a Jewish body with that Torah software. That is the combination, guys, that we need to have in the world. That's like spiritual Prozac for the Jewish people. That's what the Torah is. And I think the nicest way to end, of course, is a beautiful quote from the most important book of Jewish mysticism, which is the Zohar, quote 13. We should put this on our refrigerator. I don't know about you guys, but my refrigerator is the smartest appliance in my house. All the important information is magnets on there, What does the Tikkuni Zohar say? It's a beautiful quote. He said, the Torah is like oil in a lamp, and Israel is its wick, causing the light of God to shine forth on all creation. Let's hope we have a little Jewish unity and proactivity and Jews for Judaism, because Jews for Judaism make amazing human beings for the human race, and God knows the world needs role models. Guys, thank you very much. Have a Shabbat Shalom. I'll be back, God willing.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.